I want to welcome you, Copper Giloth, to this conversation. This is part of the Graphics Journeys interviews um, being conducted by SIGGRAPH. And today is June 25th, 2021. I'm Rebecca Perry. Welcome. Very nice to see you.
It's nice to see you.
Even virtually. I'd like to begin by asking you a little bit about how you got involved with the career that you're in and who or what inspired you to pursue your studies and career in science and art.
Um, okay, so my father worked for Bell Labs, and I was exposed to the use of new technologies. This was in the 50s, early 60s. I was exposed to these new technologies that changed the way that were going to change the way we communicate. And I can remember as a little girl going to see a demo of the picture phone at the 1964 World's Fair in Queens, New York. I was really impressed. And of course, I was with my father. And I also saw a lot of other inventions and new technologies at Bell Labs. And both of my parents were very good at using machines. So I was really inspired by that. My strengths in high school were in art and math. But I'm an artist. And like a scientist, I do experiments. And that's what I see as my art practice.
So, what was it that? So, your parents really did inspire you, and the World's Fair, it sounds like, inspired you.
Yes. Yes.
And around how old were you when you sort of got this, sense of, oh, what's interesting out there in the world?
Well, I was 12, but I was before that too. My father also worked on Nike missiles. And so I experienced those when I was under 10. I went to see them. So I was a little kid. I used to read Aviation Week. I mean, I thought I really like machines.
Wow.
I like all this stuff. So
You
I was little.
You started early. Did you? Well, this of course brings us to another question that kind of has answers itself in a sense. Did you always plan to work in the field of computer graphics?
Well, no, because when I was in high school, I didn't see that there was a field of computer graphics. I went to college at Boston University, and I studied to become a figurative sculptor in a very classical tradition. People had suggested I do an architecture degree because I was good in art and math, but I chose sculpture. At the time I was in Boston, I did some things at MIT. I looked at some experiments. I had friends there. But the thing that really shifted me is that after I graduated from college, I got a job at General Dynamics in Quincy, Massachusetts. And I got a job as a welder because I had done this welding course. And so I was working on building those large scale LNG tankers, the liquid natural gas tankers. So I was a structural welder. And what I saw in the shipyard was a computer controlled flame cutter that was cutting the pieces of ship. And I saw that and I went, I want to do that. I wanted to shift from figurative sculpture to a more abstract sculpture. And I went, I want a machine that's going to cut it. So I went, oh, I guess I'm going to have to program. So.
Wow. So that led to that. Were you thinking of a scale at the time, of the scale you wanted to work on?
No, I wanted to do large scale sculpture. I was really interested in the work of Louise Nevelson. And I thought, wow, you could really make big stuff. So if something else was cutting it.
Right.
And it would be precise.
That's fascinating. That I don't think I've ever seen a welding cutting machine like that. That's incredible.
Well, it's essentially the same thing as a plotter, except instead of drawing, it's cutting through steel.
Wow.
So it's the same technology.
Fascinating. So at that point or now, did you have a model for a role model for your career?
Well, no. I mean, you know, where were the women? That's a theme in everything that I'll say, but where were the women? But what I really saw as my role model. So I decided after discovering this thing that I would go back and get a degree in computer science, and I went to the University of Illinois in Chicago, and I ended up applying to a program there and was accepted into the electronic visualization graduate program, which was a joint program between the art and engineering departments, art and engineering computer science. And if there was anything that became kind of a role model was being in that program, because I was a grad student entering, I was an art graduate student entering with computer science graduate students, and we just sat next to each other in this room working on computers, and we were just working together next to each other and collaborating on projects. And I think that was just such a revelation to me. It was like you didn't go out to ask somebody to do a project with you. They were just there. And so you worked together and you were mutually respectful of what each person could contribute. So I think that was really important. At the same time, we had these joint seminars with the School of the Art Institute, and Phil Morton, who was a video professor there, was important for me because he really encouraged me to pay attention to my voice, to who I was and what I had to say. So he was a mentor in some ways. The other thing during that time is that, and this was the late 70s, I was given the opportunity to use the Zgrass home computer, this little tiny computer, and take it home and be able to use it and in my little studio in my apartment in Chicago and sort of integrate it with what had been a traditional drawing and sculpture practice. And I think that allowed me to, that experience was really important for where my career went. When I think of people who are role models, this was kind of hard because wasn't thinking about this at the time, but there's this couple artist, Colette and Jeff Bangert, who I got to know because of SIGGRAPH. And I think that their process was important to me. I think Donna Cox over the years has been really important in the work she's done. I think that as far as younger artists, Neri Oxman at MIT is really impressive. If I was a young artist, I think I would be really amazed. I mean, I am amazed, but I'd be amazed by her. I think there's a glitch artist named Rosa Menkman who's also very interesting. So I'm excited about all these artists who are younger than me.
You draw inspiration from a lot of sources, which is great. It's amazing. Um, so you've been involved with SIGGRAPH in so many different ways and for so many years. Do you remember how you were first introduced to SIGGRAPH and what your first activity was at SIGGRAPH?
Yes. I was a graduate student. It was when I was at University of Illinois in Chicago. And it was during that time that the SIGGRAPH video review publication started by Tom DeFonte. And my job in the first issues that came out, the first 2 issues, I think they were, is that what a person would do is they would send us their 3/4-inch tape and we would copy from the master onto their tape and send it back to them. And my job as a graduate student, seems like a typical thing, is that I copied people's SIGGRAPH video reviews onto their tape and then packaged them to be sent back. That was my first SIGGRAPH job. My first SIGGRAPH job as a conference was at SIGGRAPH. It was at SIGGRAPH 79 in Chicago, and my job was to help attendees who were having problems that were out sort of beyond registration, housing, or whatever, but just any kind of problems. So I just had to solve problems. And we had this big rainstorm at the conference, and there were floods at the airport, and people were missing sessions. I mean, there were just all sorts of confusion. So it was like every answer was different. So I was just sort of on my feet trying to like solve problems.
Wow. And how many attendees were there? I mean, at
It
that
was
point, was it?
small.
Yeah.
It was basically yeah, it was small. I can't remember the numbers, but
Yeah.
it was small.
Certainly not
And
what
it
it
was,
became at its zenith.
oh, absolutely not. It was small and it was wonderful. And you could kind of see everybody.
So that kind of leads to this next idea of how did working with the SIGGRAPH community contribute to your career?
Okay, so one of the things that I did, I moved up from solving problems to, I was the chair of two of the early SIGGRAPH art exhibitions in 1982 in Boston and 1983 in Detroit. And through the design of the exhibition, the jury process, the catalog design, installing the exhibition, I learned skills that I used in my career as an art professor and as an administrator. Um, I also got to meet these artists at these exhibitions, and it was just so invigorating for me to see the wide range of creative processes being used by these artists. We also did this big traveling exhibition to Japan and to France and Canada and around the United States. So I just got to communicate with all sorts of people and, spread the word about SIGGRAPH.
Very cool. You helped organize a few of these exhibitions, is that correct?
Yes, I did 82 and 83, and then my work was included in many exhibitions after that. There's a few other things. It was really important to get my students involved. So my professors got me involved, I got my students involved. And that was really good to see them go on to doing all sorts of things in SIGGRAPH, being chair of the conference, being head of the art exhibition, all of that. In general, SIGGRAPH was really fun. It was great to be part of the community. And um, I did a lot of other activities.
It sounds like for an artist, who was exhibiting work. Was it different to do it at SIGGRAPH than somewhere else, like say in a gallery or some other kind of? Was it a different kind of audience or a different kind of experience?
Well, I think that when I started, there were not really very many opportunities for people to exhibit their work because you were labeled as being someone who did something with a computer. And so it is different. I mean, the one thing you could count on your work being shown at SIGGRAPH is that it would work, especially if it was interactive or whatever, because you had this incredible support system. And even institute museums and galleries today, continue to struggle, although they do much better, continue to struggle with new technologies and showing something. I mean, it's really hard to do.
So a receptive and very handy audience.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think it's particularly good if you're an academic.
And why is that particularly just?
Because so much of what happens at SIGGRAPH, there's a lot of learning going on. And although there's a lot of people there that are from entertainment, it's a good place where students can learn in a very wide community. And I think that if you were to interview, and I'm sure people do interview the students who participate, who come from, universities and colleges all over the world, and they're a volunteer at SIGGRAPH, it's just kind of shocking. big the industry is.
And probably they discover things they had never even thought existed, and
Right, right.
there's that. Um, so, looking back with the benefit of your experience, would you have done anything differently to prepare for your career and your life?
I'm not sure I prepared for my career and my life. I'm not sure I took that approach. But I wrote down, I thought about your question a little bit. Um, I'm thinking that um, the terminal degree for an artist is an MFA, and I'm thinking that maybe it would have been interesting for me to have gotten an MS in computer science or a PhD in another area. I think that would have been interesting for me. One of the things that was inspirational about University of Illinois and this interdisciplinary program was that I think that if that is of interest to you, like it was to me, you should really think about where you're actually going to take a job if you want to be in an interdisciplinary setup. I think that has been very challenging at my university. And so I think you should think about that. It might be that you decide you want to be an animator, and you need to decide, are you going to be, an independent animator? Are you just going to teach animation? Are you going to work on big Hollywood films? Where are you going to be? And there's a lot of different options. I think that I probably should have changed institutions, but I think that as a woman that's complicated because of family and children, I think there's you get a complex life, and you have to make some choices. You have to make some choices, and I had to make some choices. I also took an opportunity to be an administrator. I was the director of academic computing. And so they wanted somebody from the humanities who would look at how can faculty integrate the use of technology into their teaching. And it was an interesting problem for me. And I just did it too long. I think I should have, I should have had some mentor saying, Copper, do that for 5 years, but then go back to your research and teaching. I kind of got sucked in too long. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think universities sort of, university life, they sort of expect you to be on a path for a long time. It's not a quick change kind of environment, really, is it?
No, I mean, the thing is that you have the whole process of going through, if you're in a tenure track position, that's a 6 to 7 year process. And once you're tenured, unless you do something really egregious, you have a job for life. So the question is, what do you want to do with that? What do you want to do with that? And how do you make that happen within the constraints that you have? I made some choices. I might make some different choices. I'm not unhappy. I'm just saying that, when you put the question there, you always want to go, well, could I have done that? Could I go get a PhD now? What are the choices? There's one more thing, and it has to do with SIGGRAPH that I wish I had kind of followed through on. In 1994, I had been on a jury at SIGGRAPH, and I was very concerned about the way women were imaged in computer graphics. And so I looked at that point in 1994, there were over 100 issues of the SIGGRAPH Video Review, which I obviously knew a lot about since it was my first SIGGRAPH job. And so I ended up going through them and looking at all the images of women and men. And I ended up making a piece about how women are imaged in computer graphics. And it got shown at SIGGRAPH in 1994. And it basically showed that women are very sexualized and are defined by the male gaze. And there it was in SIGGRAPH. And, it was really degrading that women were being used like they had for centuries and centuries in this contemporary educational institution, which I valued a lot, which was important for me. And I did that, and I got a real kind of some positive, some negative, some dismissal response to that by having SIGGRAPH kind of look at itself. And I think that I should have pushed it more, but I didn't. So I kind of put that into my list of like, well, was there anything about SIGGRAPH you should have done? But, I didn't. I didn't.
But what was the reception? Well, you said the reception was sort of people.
Well, no, there were people who came up to me and said, "Wow, I hadn't really thought of it that way." So there were some people who were enlightened, but anyway,
Yeah,
it
I
is
mean,
what it is.
it's a constant struggle, right? I mean, I think that's still on the agenda today for.
Yes. And it's interesting that there's probably less women going into computer graphics now than there was earlier. So, I don't know.
I have read that, and I have wondered why. And computer programming, they sometimes say that too, that there are less women going into computer programming. It's kind of surprising in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone has ever figured that out exactly. Um, well, that brings us to the idea that if there was a message about working in science or computer graphics that you would give to a young person in the audience today, what would it be?
Well, I think you need to experiment and not just look at computer graphics as a vocational. I mean, sometimes I see students who just want to get an A or want me to tell them exactly what the assignment is. And I want them to play and experiment and get out of their comfort zone and not think that everything is just an easy answer. I mean, I don't think they think it's an easy answer, but I think that they need to go further, and some of the furtherness is by playing and experimenting and not necessarily looking at whether or not they feel totally competent in Unity or totally competent in Maya or whatever. They should try to do some things that would surprise them.
Sort of more open-ended exploration.
Yeah, and yes, I know they need to worry about a job, and so did I. Now, the economic situation isn't the same, so I get that. But I think it's that creativity and that thinking outside the box that can get them further.
How do you tap into that yourself? What feeds your artistic practice? You mentioned you travel.
Well, I just mostly go to France because my research is based in France. I read in a wide range. I have a wide range about what I read. I look at things. I try doing something new every day that I haven't done before. I spend a lot of time just looking at the natural world, looking at things. And I listen to people. I ask questions.
So, I mean, I'm fascinated by this idea that where you started, the tools you were using when you first began thinking, artistically, and where that led you. That's interesting. Do you think that the tools people are using right now to create computer graphics are, you know, uh, leading them in beneficial directions, or do you think they're kind of everything's becoming too similar? I mean, are the tools better now?
Well, I mean, if you look historically at artists making work, is the paint that Michelangelo used better or worse than the paint that somebody today is using? I mean, they're different. Somebody could say what we're using now to paint is more sophisticated, but what he did was pretty amazing. I mean, I think it's whatever you have to say, is whether it's as a group that you're saying something, or as an individual. What's your story? And so I think there was a lot going on in the late 70s, early 80s about pixels, because there was a whole thing about jaggies, because there were the people who were using tiny computers like me, and there was the people who were using the higher end computers, and nobody wanted to see any pixels. And I can remember saying, well, what's wrong with pixels? Let's look at all the things around. I mean, it depends on what you do. It depends on what you're doing with this. I mean, you could do something that's very boring. Look at all the high resolution things out there that are very boring. And then there's low resolution things that are very interesting. So I think it really depends on where the creativity comes in and how you engage people.
It really sounds like, you know, um, a good point of thinking when you're looking at, well, when you look at an exhibition. Well, now we haven't been able to have a SIGGRAPH exhibition for a couple of years, I guess, except
Right.
digitally. Um, but it's interesting that that's a great way of looking at what you're looking at, what what gets selected and what gets shown at SIGGRAPH, and the contribution of the art show to SIGGRAPH now.
Yeah, it's, when I was in the early days of SIGGRAPH, there were so many venues that are at SIGGRAPH now that were not there. So it made the art exhibition very different. Also, there were many interdisciplinary teams of people making things that were in the art shows. So that if you look back, you can look back at that time and see that there's people who you would say, oh, he was a scientist, but why is his work in the art exhibition? I mean, there's a lot of, and you see that now too. You see in terms of the groups that are making things. So I think that makes SIGGRAPH a very vibrant place, because it's not a museum. I mean, it's not a museum. It's not a it's about this community. And it's, and so I think that that's, you know, I don't think it should try to be a museum. The art, I don't. I mean, it's an exhibition.
Right.
So,
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. It's a completely different audience than you would get in any other venue. So, um, yeah, excellent symbiosis there. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for contributing and for being part of this Graphics Journeys series. And thank you very much for joining.